Happy Hump Day, Houdat Nation, and a happy Wednesday to all of our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is doing very, very well out there, all of you and all of your families. To those who celebrated, happy Ash Wednesday to you. Folks, I plan on giving up absolutely nothing. Uh, Nothing at all. And with that, my name is Bob Rose. I am one of your hosts for the Bayou Blitz podcast this evening. Joining me is my partner in crime, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
I'm good. I don't think I'm giving up anything either. I mean, I haven't drank soda in forever. Like, that's the easy ones, the candies, the sodas, but maybe some sweets because I've been really bad about it since Christmas, but everybody is, right? Like, somehow, some way, there's way too much candy in your stocking at Christmas time, and it prolongs all the way to the next Christmas, and then you just refill and you refuel. But before we get rolling, I wanted to do two things real quick, Bob, if you don't mind. The first is to my mother, happy birthday. You're 28, according to you, which, doesn't make a whole lot of mathematical sense. But in your defense, Mom, when you were adopted from Korea, there are no, papers. There's no proof. You don't have a birth certificate.
Exactly.
So we don't know. We don't know if today is actually your birthday. We don't know how old you are. So you can make up whatever you want. You're free to. I hope you had a wonderful day. I know she spent a lot of the day at her job at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, but hopefully you got home, got to hang out and do something. I'll be down over the weekend, so hopefully we'll be able to knock out some Saturday brunch or something for your birthday. Looking forward to that, Mom. So happy birthday. Also wanted to take a second real quick on some more sadder news in the personal life of Brendan. Got the unfortunate news today that my great uncle Richie passed away. And that is very important to me because if it wasn't for my uncle Richie, I wouldn't be here doing a show right now. He introduced my father to the New Orleans Saints when my dad was a kid. So my dad became a Saints fan while my uncle Richie was living in New Orleans. And then that got passed down to me. And even over the years, my uncle Richie bet every year. And he'd send us the ticket stub to claim if it happened because he's in Vegas, right? So gambling capital of the world. But he bet every year that the Saints would win the Super Bowl, and he'd send us the ticket. And then it finally happened, and he never did it anymore. He said, I lost so much money. We finally cashed out. We're not going to do it anymore. So, no, he's the sole reason that I grew up a Saints fan. He's the sole reason that I looked for a network and an outlet to be able to cover my favorite team. So I'm super thankful for that. He lived a good life. He was 89, but very thankful for everything that he did and just a day to kind of celebrate his life and his memory. But awesome stuff. Awesome that, in a weird way, just because he lived in New Orleans and he loved football so much that I got to kind of see out the last, 8 years with Saints News and then podcast with you. So super, super happy to celebrate his life today, and happy birthday to my mom. But with that, we'll get into what was a little bit of a slower news week for the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, they start off with a bang in the offseason before the offseason even officially started, right? We had breaking Saints news from the time the regular season ended to about this week, and things kind of slowed down. They had some restructures. They had a couple guys re-sign, including Calvin Throckmorton, a guy we both like. That was official today. And just a couple days ago, a guy that shares my hometown in New Jersey, Keith Kirkwood, re-signed on a one-year contract as well. Restructures of Eric McCoy and Marcus May, which we'll kind of dive into the importance of those. But you guys see it on the screen. I posed the question this week that, is this the most important Saints offseason ever? And that is going to be a question that is a common theme, not just tonight, but throughout the offseason. And we may have 10, 15 minutes every episode where we talk about the importance of things that are going to happen this offseason and how it kind of shifts where the Saints are going in a direction, right? If you're on a highway right now, the Saints can make a couple moves, you take this exit. If the Saints miss that exit because they don't make a couple moves, they could certainly take a next exit. But that could lead to rebuild. That could lead to playoff chances. That could lead to going all in for a Super Bowl run. There's a lot of different ways this can go, and the Saints are at a true crossroads here this offseason, Bob. And that crossroads got Another intersection or 2 or 7 with what happened this week regarding Alvin Kamara. Last week we talked to you guys. He was indicted of assault charges out in Las Vegas after what happened at the Pro Bowl just a couple years ago. And now TMZ, I believe, could be wrong. Don't want to get my outlets wrong, but it's usually TMZ that releases videos. So the video got released, the footage. It might have been CBS, but the footage of the nightclub got released, and it does not look good. Obviously, we all knew that the footage was out there, but it hadn't been released to the public yet. It's now been released to the public. It doesn't look good. Bob, what's your initial reaction to seeing Alvin Kamara along with a couple fellow gentlemen in that video?
Disappointment. And the reason why it's disappointment is, like you said, Brendan, it's not like none of us knew that these things took place. Kamara and the other 3 members indicted and who are being charged that were with him. None of them ever necessarily denied that there was a physical confrontation. But I continue to be disappointed that Alvin, especially Alvin, because he's such a prominent player for the team that we like, for the team that we cover. But really, any of those guys even got themselves in that situation. Now, if you haven't seen the video, be warned, because it is fairly graphic. From a physical confrontation point of view, a fight, a brawl, and it contained Kamara and the other three guys that were with him, just beating down to a pretty good extent. The guy that's named as the accuser, and the person who's also filing a civil suit against Kamara in the state of Louisiana. Now, what the video does not show is what happened before the confrontation. That's what Kamara and the rest of his party are going to be fighting in court, presumably, because they do say that they are not pleading guilty. Kamara and his representatives have said over and over again, up to and including today, that they are not pleading guilty. They are not pleading no contest, that they intend on fighting this. You would think, if you've seen the video, you already know this, you would think that it's on the grounds of something that had happened to trigger the incident before it was caught on camera. We can only speculate at that. But again, I'm disappointed because you can't find yourself in these kind of situations. It puts obviously your own safety at risk, the safety of those around you, those are with you, but also your livelihood. Alvin Kamara makes a pretty good penny playing the game of football. And if you're lucky, you're only able to play this game for a very, very, very small percentage of your life. And to put that livelihood in general, or in jeopardy because of actions like this, I realize that you can't always walk away from a confrontation. Believe me, I know. I have been in confrontations where I was able to walk away. I've been in confrontations where I was not able to walk away. And I've been in a few where if I look back on it, I probably could have walked away. Hindsight is always 20/20 in these situations. But again, you have to realize who you are. And so much can happen when you get into a fight. You don't know if the other person is armed. You don't know if the other person has friends. You don't know the legal ramifications of what you do. It just there are so many things that can go wrong and so little that can go right. When you find yourself in these situations. And in my opinion, Alvin Kamara has not only potentially let himself down, but and forget the fan base for a minute. And guys, I know I say that a lot, but seriously, Alvin Kamara, again, I'll state, is a very prominent member of an NFL franchise. That means that there are other people in that locker room, that there are other people in that building that count on him. And now you have put their livelihood in jeopardy just a little bit by your action if your actions take you off the field for a specified period of time.
Yeah, I think my initial reaction was this. It's not good. You're prolonging the inevitable. We kind of talked about that throughout the course of the season. However, and it's kind of sickening to think about as well, is we've had instances like this before in the NFL where something really bad has been caught either on camera or text conversations have leaked, and what have you. Technology's made it almost impossible to run away from whatever you're hiding. And we've seen this happen before, and the ramifications, if the party is guilty, be next to nothing. And so my initial reaction to it was, yeah, this looks really bad, but I'm willing to bet that Kamara serves a very small suspension, and whatever happens in court is going to be minimal, whether he, and obviously, innocent till proven guilty, right? But even if, I don't foresee this being a big issue by the eyes of the NFL. And that's sad to say, but that's where we are. And it's not just the NFL, it's all the major sports across the world, not just in the States, across the world. Do the Saints need to start looking for potential Alvin Kamara replacements? In the long term? No. In the short term? Absolutely. And that kind of plays into this being a super important offseason because not just Alvin Kamara, and we talked about everything that's going on in his life and legal battle, not civil suit as well, you mentioned. But you look at Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas as guys that were supposed to be cornerstones of this franchise. And both those guys could, either be gone, which Bob, I've kind of let it slide, but you really hinted at that at the end of the year that you had some opinions that Kamara might be gone. But they could both be well out the building. One of them could be out of the building. One of them could be out of the building. The other one could be suspended. Or in a very, very odd, magical world, they could both be on the roster. I would say that world is at like a 0.0000. It's so minuscule. It is the Lloyd Christmas. So you're telling me there's a chance. That's kind of where we're at with those odds. But I think that with that said, you could see this team make a total they could make a total U-turn with what they've been doing with this team as of late. Now, I want us to get to some of these comments. A lot of comments of they need to draft a running back or look at some free agents. We can certainly talk about that. It's a little too early to preview free agency because a lot of things can happen. Other guys can get cut. I disagree. I think they're going to punish AK Big. You guys with the NFL and Goodell hate the Saints. That is true. But you look back at some of the suspensions over the years and it's hard because there hasn't quite been an instance of assault like this, right? There's been instances. My immediate thoughts in terms of video and whatnot, you go to the Ray Rices of the world.
Yeah.
You go to the Kareem Hunts of the world. Not a video, but intercepted like conversation, if I'm not mistaken, for Greg Hardy back in the day. And yes, Ray Rice was made an example, right? Mm-hmm. But Kareem Hunt's wasn't atrociously long of a suspension. He was cut and then just didn't play. And then even Greg Hardy, not a super long suspension, but was cut and then played for the Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
The point being is it's going to be, let's say, a 6 to 8 week suspension is what I'm thinking. Somewhere in that ballpark. But if everything is true and Kamara is found guilty, in my opinion, it should be the whole year. It should be a lot longer. But it's not going to be. And that's kind of the point I was getting at.
Well, the baseline suspension for something like this is actually spelled out fairly clearly and the NFL players agreement with the with the league and the owners, and that is it's a violation of personal conduct policy, with a physical confrontation that is a baseline of a 6-game suspension. Now, just like in any other situation, the commissioner's office has the right to reduce or lengthen that suspension as they see fit. So at least we have a baseline here. And therefore, unless harsher evidence comes out in the court of law, if that doesn't happen, then I agree with you, Brendan. I see it probably being a 6-game suspension, maybe an 8-game suspension that gets appealed down to 6. Possibly, if the Saints and Kamara are lucky, a 6-game suspension that gets appealed down to 4 or 5. But that I think at the very minimum we're looking between 4 and 8 games. Probably at 6. We've seen the Saints without Kamara in the past, and the results are not pretty. And like you said, we'll have plenty of time to talk about what the Saints need to do on the football field, to replace him, because both you and I have have labeled the running back as a position of fairly great need, even with Kamara on the roster going into this offseason. So I'm not about to change that now. So folks that are saying that the Saints need to draft a running back, they need to address the position, whether it's in the draft or free agency. And as we sit here tonight on February 22nd, I believe it is, there are a lot of big name running backs that will be headed towards free agency. And folks, this is one position where even the stars aren't making back-breaking contracts. So if there's a positive thing to take out of this from a New Orleans Saints franchise perspective, it's that you can bring in a very, very good running back, a number 1 caliber running back, without having to bust your salary cap into little pieces to do so. So do the Saints need to add a quality back on this roster? Yes, absolutely. And that's with or without Kamara. The need increases exponentially if Kamara is not going to be available, for sure. But folks, they don't have to do it in the draft, is what I'm saying.
I agree. I have a weird gut feeling. Bob has a lot of these gut feelings throughout the year. I'm having one early. That as much as we talked about Mark Ingram being, let's say E on the gas tank, he's not quite out of gas, but that light's flashing at you. I do have a gut feeling he's going to be back next year. Whether that is to carry the ball 5 times, 10 times, whether it's just there to be a mentor to whoever's in the room, I have a feeling that Mark's going to be back. They're going to give him one last go at it. And maybe Mark wants that because he didn't even get to see out the last bit of the season because of injury. So maybe Mark wants one more crack at it. And I'm totally okay with that, but that doesn't solve the issue.
Not right. Not as the number 1 back. And I'm with you. I find it interesting that Ingram has not addressed the issue of potential retirement whatsoever. Now, he is going to be an unrestricted free agent, but one would think that if the Saints wanted him back and if Ingram wanted to continue playing, that a contract to bring back Mark Ingram is not going to be that big a salary cap hit whatsoever. But again, definitely not as a number 1 back, not even as a 1A or a complimentary back. This is for depth, and experience purposes. If you're going to focus on bringing in younger backs, for Mark to kind of mentor those guys.
Absolutely. Guy who's going to get some goal line carries, third and short carries, really just be a mentor. And yeah, I could definitely see him coming back on a 1-year, $2 million contract, just to be able to retire a Saint, play out his career. Because it's crazy to say, because early in his career, there was a lot of people that wanted him out the door super quick. But he's going to go down in my opinion, he's going to go down as a top 3 back in Saints history. I mean, the numbers are there to back it up. And it's unfortunate that he left in his prime to go to Baltimore and that whole fiasco, and that was a weird thing. But nonetheless, he had some great years. With that being said, we've looked at the roster. We've looked at the roster and said, okay, well, like Washington is a special teamer. That's why he's on the roster every year. Kamara, let's say he's suspended. So right now it's like, well, you have Mark Ingram. Who you even say you don't even have Mark Ingram because he's an unrestricted free agent.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even have Benjamin because he's a free agent as well.
Mm-hmm. You have Adam Prentice.
That's it. Who's a fullback. So it's wide open. I saw somebody in the comments, Gumbo saying David Montgomery with a little face. That's an interesting ad, but like I said, we can jump into free agency a little bit later in the off season. But running back's going to be a huge position of need, and Kamara's legal battle has made it all that more confusing. I mentioned Michael Thomas a little bit earlier. And that's an interesting one, too, because going into this season, Bob, I think it was safe to say prior to week 1, your receiving depth chart was as follows. Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave, Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, 4-5. You could flip-flop them all you want. Well, at this point, 4 of those guys may not be on the roster next year. Now, Olave stepped up and showed he has all the potential we thought he would.
Mm-hmm.
He could definitely be a number 1 receiver at some point in the NFL. I think he's a better number 2 receiver at this point in his career. Obviously, going into your second year, that's not a bad place to be at all. Rashid Shaheed stepped up and proved that he could be an offensive weapon. I won't label him in a specific spot in the chart, but he can be an offensive weapon for you. But all your other receivers are huge question marks at this point. And while we've talked about running backs a whole lot, quarterbacks got to have a lot of attention. We'll talk about the latest with Derek Carr here in a second, because he's still supposedly the favorite to go to New Orleans, despite meeting with the Jets this week. And like I said, we'll get to that. But at receiver, outside of Olave, who's left? Right? Because like I said, Thomas likely to be released. Jarvis Landry likely not to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they want to bring him back on like a super small deal to play for your hometown team. But I don't see that happening. Callaway is that's an interesting one. I think my gut's telling me he'll stay on a small contract to be like a number 4 receiver.
He's a restricted free agent, so I mean, the Saints could tender him at a low tender. Exactly. Probably one in the range where they wouldn't salary range where they wouldn't get any compensation if he were signed by another team. But I could see that scenario where they give him a small qualifying offer, and if nobody matches it, then Callaway is back. That's important to note because Marquez does have experience in Pete Carmichael's system. He has shown potential to be a quality number 4-ish guy, but also has shown us, definitely shown us that he's not a guy that you should be counting on to be a number 2 or even a number 3 receiver.
Right. He's had flashes. We've had a lot of New Orleans Saints receivers that had flashes that just didn't stick. And then you have, going through this again, Deontay Harris is a really weird situation because he was supposed to be your special teams ace, and now it looks like he's lost that role. Was starting to grow as a receiver and then got hurt. Mm-hmm. And now there's big questions on, do you really want 2 of the same player on the team?
Yeah.
And I think Shaheed has proven to be a little bit better of a version of Harris at this point. And then you have Traquan Smith, your favorite person in the world. Traquan's not – there is no chance that he comes back again. And but he's got so much familiarity with the system. Yeah. And if they're getting into a crunch of trying to fill that position out, I could very much see, let's bring Traquan back on another one-year deal for this much.
Well, Brennan, yeah, the thing is, Traquan's not a free agent. Deontay's a free agent. Marquez is a free agent. When they re-signed Trey last year, they did so on a 2-year contract. Now he's only like a $3 million, $3.5 million, $4 million salary cap hit. And by contrast, if the Saints do cut him, they save that handful of $1 million. He won't be dead cap money. But at this point, given the uncertainty at the position and knowing you're going to have to bring in receivers anyway, it wouldn't. And I'm not advocating this, folks. If you've watched me or followed my work, you know I am no fan of the player known as Traquan Smith. But at this point in time, you got to believe the Saints are probably going to bring him back.
Well, I want to jump into this because this is an important question because restructuring gets super confusing every year, right? So this is a great question from Gumbo. Is it true for cap purposes it's better to keep Thomas on the roster than take the dead cap hit? That has changed because of the restructure, Bob.
Yes.
So the way New Orleans restructured this contract is sort of like a roster bonus. If you're on the roster by a certain date, you're going to get paid this much. And the way they restructured it with Michael Thomas is if he's on the roster on whatever the set date is.
March 17th.
There you go. Thanks, Bob. March 17th, he is going to make $30+ million of a roster bonus. So to put this as nicely as I can, I love Michael Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And I have defended him to the best of my ability for the last 3 seasons. Because at the end of the day, it's not his fault that he got hurt. It's not his fault that the medical staff for New Orleans that has and I know it's a different medical staff than some of the past instances that have happened. You can look over my right shoulder, left shoulder.
Left
shoulder. Left shoulder. Yeah. My left shoulder know what I'm talking about. I know it's a different medical staff, but this is not the first time we've seen New Orleans have issues with keeping players healthy. And they dropped the ball on this one. I'll go on the record and say that. Whether it was Sean, whether it was the medical staff, whether it was New Orleans, clearly there was miscommunication on how they wanted to handle it. That can go on both parties. But majority of this blame has to go on the New Orleans side because there's no way in hell that for 3 seasons a guy should be dealing with essentially the same injury. This last year, a little bit of ankle, some toe stuff as well. Okay, So be it. But that's not Mike's fault. And when Mike's healthy, and even this past season, where he clearly was not the same Michael Thomas of years past, you look at those first 3 weeks, right? And you guys know I'm a fantasy football guy. You look at those first 3 weeks of the season. Yeah, they weren't outstanding numbers, but he came up with big catches at big times, found the end zone quite a bit, and he was a top 7 PPR receiver in football the first 3 weeks of the season. He's still dominant when he's able to get out on the field, but unfortunately, because of the contract, because of his lack of being on the field itself, what should have been a Saints Hall of Fame career, a potential Hall of Fame career, is no longer going to happen. So to answer your question, no, it is not better for Thomas to be on the roster at this point. He will likely be, I don't even think it's likely, I'd say 99.999% chance that he's going to be released by the team.
Yeah, and that's exactly why they did this restructure. That's exactly why Thomas agreed to this restructure. Because, folks, a player has to agree to be restructured. Because it's their contract. And now 9 times out of 10, it's either agree to restructure or we're going to have to cut you. In this case, Thomas was agreeable to the restructure so he could hit the free agent market and find a fresh start somewhere else. It's a sad ending to what was an absolutely legendary start to a career. And I say, I don't back off of that term legendary. I mean, he had more catches and more yards over his first 4 years than anybody in the history of the NFL. More than Randy Moss, more than Larry Fitzgerald, more than the immortal Jerry Rice. Michael Thomas was that guy. But this restructure was made so New Orleans could move on from Thomas, and so Thomas could move on from New Orleans. It's really that simple. And I'm with you. I'm a big fan of Michael Thomas too. I have been since his Ohio State days. But Michael Thomas is not going to be a New Orleans Saint in 2023.
No, and frankly, I don't. There are some cases, not so much in the NFL, but there are some cases where you see reunions down the road. Mark Ingram's a good example. We were talking about Mark a little bit ago. I don't see Michael Thomas in New Orleans having a reunion. I think I don't even want to say too much bad blood. I think there were too many hiccups in the relationship. I know Mike still loves Who Dat Nation. He loves his fans. It's very evident if you interact with him or follow him on any social media platform. But there are too many hiccups in the relationship, too many bumpy spots for reunion to be possible. Now, I could be wrong. Things can happen. But if I had to shake the magic 8 ball right now, I don't think it's giving me a positive answer. So those are two really important positions of need going into the off season. And to kind of go back to the question posed that's on the screen right now, if the Saints address this at the running back spot, kind of what Bob was saying, if the Saints go and they get a number one quality running back that's going to play and start those 6 to 8 weeks we're guesstimating of Kamara suspension, and the two of them get to kind of tag team it the back half, well, now you're talking about a new Saints offense, because the offense was tremendously awful. I don't even know if that's proper use of the English language, but it was tremendously awful. And then you look at wide receiver, and if the Saints go and they fill it with familiar faces and don't really make a big move to complement Chris Olave, well, we're going back to the last couple years of the Saints wide receiver room. But if they go and they grab somebody to complement Chris Olave, honestly, Bob, to me, it doesn't even have to be like a gigantic name.
No.
Would it be awesome? Would it be awesome for them to get a guy like Hopkins? Yes, I think that would be awesome. But is that likely to happen? No, it's not.
We're talking about a team that's still about 48, 49 million over the salary cap as we sit here this evening. And what I just said a few segments ago about veteran running back contracts in the NFL being, for the most part, fairly reasonable, the exact opposite is true for veteran wide receivers. Absolutely. You look at what Christian Kirk got paid last year with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Christian Kirk is not better than Michael Thomas. He's not better than Chris Olave. And I know Kirk had a nice year. I would take Rashid Shaheed over Christian Kirk based off of I've seen a lot more of Shaheed since he plays for the team that I cover. But I'm not a fan of Christian Kirk. So the idea that the Saints are going to get a top flight receiver, a top tier receiver in free agency or via trade ain't going to happen, folks.
But I think that's going to determine what they do with those two positions this offseason. Is going to determine whether or not at the beginning of the season we can say, okay, this is a team that's going to contend for a playoff spot again, or this is a team that is going into a total rebuild. And I think that's all capped off by what they do at quarterback. Now, again, this is kind of recapping a little bit of last week as well. It is likely, and the reports came out last week, which it shocked me it took that long for the reports to come out. Reports are that Jameis Winston is likely to be released by New Orleans. And really crazy, for all you guys that watch the show and listen week in and week out, probably thinking like, didn't Bob and Brendan break that like months ago?
November?
Yeah, I mean, come on. That's another guy that I love Jameis Winston. And not always on the field. There are moments on the field that he was awesome. There are moments on the field he wasn't so awesome. But you talk about a guy who just is a lovable human being that loved and embraced New Orleans from the moment he got there. It's Jameis Winston. I would love to see him get a second chance. It's not going to happen, though. And that's unfortunate. But going back to like what I think Drew said it to Zion Williamson when he got drafted by the Pelicans was, if you love New Orleans, the city will love you back. Jameis embraced that to a T.
Yeah.
And I can respect that. And I can be almost thankful for that, because there's not every player that plays in New Orleans or any team embraces the city, and not just the fan base, but the city, and wants to make a difference where they are. And Jameis has. So regardless of what you thought about the football field, Jameis Winston, I can guarantee you he's still going to do work in New Orleans wherever he goes. And he's going to be a fun, lovable human being. Now, with that being said, with no Jameis, Andy Dalton's a free agent. There's only one quarterback that's under contract next year. Is that right? Is there any quarterback?
No, unless you count tight end Taysom Hill.
No, because he's officially a tight end.
Right.
Yeah.
So no, they do not have a current quarterback. A quarterback. Well, assuming they're going to release Jameis Winston, then they will not have a quarterback under contract.
I was thinking maybe like a practice squad guy got brought back, or
no, I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
You're better at that. You're better at keeping up with that stuff than I have been over the years. So, yeah, I mean, the Saints, as of today, only have Jameis Winston on the roster at quarterback. So a lot of the news surrounded Derek Carr and his visit in New Orleans, and then there was a deal in place if he wanted to be traded. And then he went to the Raiders and said, no, I don't want to be traded, which we both agreed actually helped New Orleans' case, because you're not having to take on that massive contract and give up something, right? He's still going to get paid wherever he goes, because let's face it, outside of Lamar Jackson, he's the next best option on the market.
Yeah, unless you're a Garoppolo guy. I think Lamar, who will never hit free agency, folks. I say that week after week, and I'm going to continue to say it. Right after that, my opinion, Carr, Garoppolo, whichever one you prefer. So I think, I think Carr and Garoppolo are 2A and 2B, whatever order you want to look at them.
And the latest on Derek Carr is he's met with the Jets, and the Jets have told him, you're a first ballot Hall of Famer if you win in New York. That is the quote of the year. That is the quote of the decade. And that's not just for football. That's for anybody.
Yeah.
You guys know I love my basketball. Man, could you imagine if the Knicks went to LeBron and when he becomes a free agent at 40 years old and goes, LeBron, if you win in New York, you're the GOAT. If you can bring the Knicks a title, you're the GOAT. Hey, I'm going to be honest, that's a ballsy thing to say as a franchise, because you just admitted that you suck. You know what I mean? Like, you just flat out admitted, we are terrible. If you can take us to the promised land, or if we could even get to a point where we could maybe a couple miles in the distance even get a glance of the promised land, you're a first ballot Hall of Famer, Derek Carr. So if I'm sitting there and I'm Derek Carr, I'm thinking, do I really want to do this? Because if I fail, like if I'm a first ballot Hall of Famer, I take you guys to the promised land. What happens if I fail? What happens if you surround me with,
Yeah, I mean, Derek Carr's older brother, David, who might be the most shell-shocked player in NFL history. I wish he'd shut his mouth. What Derek Carr needs to do is place a couple of personal phone calls to Chad Penning, or Chad Pennington. Do I have the name right? Chad Pennington?
Yeah.
Okay.
A name I haven't heard in a long time.
Right. Neil O'Donnell. Even Zach and Mike, from last year's teams. Mark Sanchez. Ask them what it's like to be a quarterback for the New York Jets.
Sanchez got too much hate. It's personal opinion, but
what's that?
I said Sanchez got too much hate. He went to back-to-back AFC title games. That's just my opinion, though.
Look, and I don't agree with that. And Pennington had a solid career for the Jets. He led them on a few playoff runs, but that's exactly my point. This is why Derek Carr needs to place phone calls to these guys. Hey, what was it like playing playing quarterback for the New York Jets? If it doesn't send any of those guys, Sanchez and the rest, into a PTSD flashback, then Derek Carr is going to have his answer real, real quick. That's if I'm Derek Carr's agent, yeah, I'm pounding the pavement to get my client as much money as possible. But I'm also kind of suggesting, Derek, here's a couple guys I think you should call.
So people really reacted to that one. Somebody hit the reset button. What? Say that again? Yeah, so I'll say it again. The Jets flat out told Derek Carr if he comes to New York and he wins in New York, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, which again baffles me because that's a crazy thing to say if you're a franchise. You just admitted that you stink. And honestly, that goes for all New York sports outside the Yankees, really. And I'm a lifelong Mets fan, so I hurt every year because they're atrocious and they get my hopes up. But playing in New York's hard, but really outside of the Yankees, what New York franchise over the last 20 years has won anything? Bob's face gave you the answer. No, nobody has.
My first thought was the Rangers Stanley Cup, but I think that was like in the mid and late 90s, so not that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying is it's nobody, and it's tremendously hard to play there. See, John Butler had me 1994. Yeah, thanks, John. I knew that. Curse of 1994 because they haven't won it since Mark Messier. Anyway, no, it's hard to play in New York. They don't win, and yeah. If you are the prodigal son that comes to New York and wins them a title, you will never have to buy anything again in your life. You go out anywhere and you're set. You might even be a first ballot Hall of Famer because people are shocked that you took anybody to a championship. But if I'm sitting in that meeting, Bob, and Derek Carr is a little bit older than me, but you're sitting and you're still in the prime of your career. In his case, he has a wife. He has, I believe, 3 kids, maybe 4 kids at this point. One, to be completely honest with you, raising your kids in New York, probably not the greatest idea in the world. Just going to be honest. Just throwing it out there. I'm from New Jersey. I think I have a little bit of an opinion here. Growing up in the Northeast, and you're right there too. You're right there in Pittsburgh. Growing up in the Northeast isn't the greatest thing in the world for kids. It's just not. So there's that, right? No offense to New Orleans, but New Orleans doesn't need that much better. Trying to raise your kids down there, and it's humid, but I'm just getting picky at that point. So you have that, raising your kids in New York. You have the media pressure of that. And at this point in your career, are you looking to get paid and be in the media scrutiny? Are you looking to get paid and not be in media scrutiny? Or are you looking for a championship? Those are really your 3 options. And I think option 1's gone. And then you go, okay, do I want to get paid and not really be in the media eye a whole lot? Or do I want to chase a championship? Now, with his options, there's not really like a championship caliber team that's just missing a quarterback at this point. Let's be honest. If you're looking at the realm of quarterback needy teams, Green Bay's hard because every year it seems like Green Bay is right there in the NFC North title. But if Green Bay was not 100% sold on Jordan Love as their next quarterback and they wanted Carr, okay, so be it. But if I had the choice between Carr and Rodgers wanted to come back, I'm taking Aaron Rodgers. But nonetheless, Derek Carr is really going to get his options of where do I want to get paid and not be in scrutiny? Or where do I want to be paid and be in scrutiny? It's just that's not an attractive pitch to me. If I'm sitting there and a team goes, yeah, if you do it, you're first ballot, like that's not attractive to me because you're putting a lot of pressure on a guy at that point in his career. Now, he supposedly has meetings set up with the Panthers still. I know the Colts have shown some interest. Obviously, the Saints have interest. Bob, outside of the crazy headline that came out of New York, what have you heard about Derek Carr at this point? And is this going to be a short or a long process in him making up his mind on where he's going to go?
Well, one of the reasons why I said his shell-shocked brother David Carr needs to shut the F up, is because David Carr has come out in social media and interviews and said that he believes that it's going to be a long process and that he believes it should be a long process. If you're Derek Carr, you shouldn't want to feel rushed. I mean, this is a big, literally life-changing decision for you. But as of this moment, the New Orleans Saints and New York Jets are the only two teams who have officially met with Derek Carr. Therefore, those are the only teams that have officially shown strong interest. A lot of people think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to jump into the fray, and want to sit down with him at some point. You mentioned the Carolina Panthers. Wouldn't surprise me if the Houston Texans sat down and met with him. But like you said, Brendan, none of those teams are considered Super Bowl contenders or just the quarterback away from being a Super Bowl contender. If you look at the rosters, maybe Tampa Bay might be the most attractive. 3 straight playoff appearances, 2 years removed from a Super Bowl victory. A lot of that veteran team, at least currently, still intact. A lot of people, for some reason, view the Jets as a legitimate playoff contender. They feel that only quarterback play held the Jets back last year. I say look a little bit harder. That defense is for real, but that Jets offense is still full of holes. So I think the decision for Derek Carr, it depends on your definition of a drawn-out process. The free agency legal tampering period, another one of Goodell's wonderful terms, that starts March 13th. You can officially begin signing free agents on March 15th. I believe that we're going to find out relatively quickly after that where Derek Carr is going to end up. This is not going to be a long, drawn-out process well into free agency because you also have guys like Garoppolo. Is Geno Smith going to re-sign with Seattle? I believe he probably will. Is Daniel Jones going to re-sign with the New York Giants? I believe that there's a greater than 50% chance that happens. So there's other quarterback dominoes that need to fall. What's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers? I think, as goofy as this sounds, I think the Derek Carr situation is going to be dictated by the Aaron Rodgers decision. I now believe that Aaron is probably going to come back to Green Bay, that this is just his latest attention-grabbing stunt. But say he doesn't. Say Aaron Rodgers doesn't come back to Green Bay. Now Green Bay has to make a decision. Is Jordan Love our guy, or are we in the quarterback sweepstakes? Reed, Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, etc. Does Aaron Rodgers want to still play, but not for Green Bay? If so, where is Aaron Rodgers going to end up playing? And that's the one thing that could hang up the Derek Carr situation. Because like you just said yourself, if you're a franchise and you have the choice between Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr, most sane people are going to pick Aaron Rodgers. I'm one of those outliers that would go with Derek Carr just because I don't want the damn drama that comes with the overration of Rodgers. But nonetheless, 99% of the franchises out there are going to choose to go after Aaron Rodgers rather than Derek Carr. So that's where I think this proceeding could get hung up. Not to mention the fact that we mentioned the Texans. Panthers have a top 10 pick. Falcons have a top 10 pick. I mentioned Texans. Colts have a top 10 pick, and you're looking at 3 quarterbacks that are for sure going to go in the top 10, and potentially a 4th if you believe that somebody is going to reach a little bit early and take Anthony Richardson that high. So a lot of teams have a lot of fast decisions. I realize the draft isn't until the end of April, but you don't want to go into that draft saying, unless you have the number 1 or number 2 overall selection and are slam dunk guaranteed to get one of these quarterbacks, you don't want to be in a franchise in a position that, oh my God, we're going into the draft and we're still without a quarterback. So I think once the first domino starts to fall at free agency or a couple days or a week in, then everything else is going to come along fairly rapidly. So that puts us at what, 3rd week of March at tops? I think if the Derek Carr situation is resolved by this by early in free agency or the third week of March, I don't consider that a long drawn out process.
No, I wouldn't either, especially because you can't. What was the term that Goodell uses? Legally tamper. Until just a couple days before. So, with that being said, I do want to talk about. You talked about quarterbacks in the draft. Remember, the Saints, since trading Sean Payton, are back in the first round. It's the very end of the first round. It's at pick 29. Means it's going to be a late night for lots of us, huh? But nonetheless, there has been one name linked to the Saints a lot as of late. A lot of fans would like to see him, and reports saying that the Saints have met at length with Hayden Hooker of Tennessee, obviously coming off an injury, but he's expected to be ready to go for camp. What are you hearing about the New Orleans Saints and the man in Tennessee?
I'll tell you what, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Herndon Hooker. You know that. Reaching back the previous 2 years at Tennessee, he showed some real playmaking ability, very, very good mechanics as a passer. And the Saints are reportedly one of 4 or 5 other teams to have met with Hooker and his representatives pretty extensively over Senior Bowl weekend. NFL teams and their exposure to draft potential draft picks at this stage is relatively limited. So don't put a whole lot into that. Hooker is expected to be the 5th quarterback off the board. Bryce Young of Alabama, in no particular order, Bryce Young of Alabama, C.J. Stroud of Ohio State, Will Levis of Kentucky, and the aforementioned Anthony Richardson of Florida. Those are pretty much consensus picks for the top 4 quarterbacks. Hooker's draft projection, as we sit here right now, I've seen it anywhere from early 3rd round to late 1st round. In other words, the New Orleans Saints are probably going to have a legitimate shot if they want to draft Hendon Hooker to be their next quarterback. Expect the Saints to do their research on him very extensively, but expect the Saints to do the research on the other guys too. The other guys who are expected to go before the 29th selection, where the Saints currently sit, because the question then is going to be, do the Saints have the ammunition to move up and get one of these guys if they're interested? That's a little iffy, but depending on what you want to give up, I think we could see that possibility. But what if the Saints fall in love with Hendon Hooker? They may have to trade up to get him. You don't want to sit and wait. If you need a quarterback, you don't want to sit and wait for that draft to come to you. You have to go get it. That's why we see quarterbacks overdrafted, because teams in need of a quarterback, they can't afford to wait for one. So the Saints' interest in Hooker is going to be this. If they get a Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo in free agency, and I have said this before, if that happens, then it's only because that the New Orleans Saints at least view Derek Carr as their immediate quarterback for the future. And Carr's 30, 31, 32 years old. That means that probably takes drafting Hooker in the 1st round off the table, especially with so many other needs. But they'll continue to do their research on a guy like Hooker and others, because what if the draft projection, some of the other draft projections are right? If Hooker falls to the 2nd round, to the 3rd round, all of a sudden that changes your perspective a little bit. If you sit there and you pass on Hooker once in the 1st round, he's there again in the 2nd. You draft for need in the 2nd, but he's there again for you in the 3rd. You cannot look past that at that stage, if you ask me. So while I expect the Saints to go after a quarterback in free agency, whether they end up landing a Carr and you folks shudder every time I mention one of these names, a guy like Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Jacoby Brissett, another guy with some starting experience. Depends how highly they prioritize the position in free agency, whether they shoot their sights on a guy like Hooker or trading up in the 1st round.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, I think it's important to remember this is with free agency opening like what, a month and a half before the draft, maybe like a month and a week. What the Saints do in free agency at quarterback will ultimately tell you what their intentions are in the draft, right? To Bob's point, if they go and they get Derek Carr and they sign him for a 4-year, $150 million contract or whatever it may end up being, Saints aren't drafting anybody, on day one, probably not even day two, unless Hooker falls or anybody, of that caliber falls to round 3. Now, if the Saints go and they sign a guy like, just to use Bob's examples, Baker Mayfield, Jacoby Brissett, even an old friend in Teddy Bridgewater, to a year contract, it tells you the Saints are going to be going after a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the dangerous thing with that is you're going to be showing your hand either way.
Yeah.
To the rest of the league. And trust me, the NFL is petty. And if there's an opportunity for someone to go, hey, well, the Saints signed Baker Mayfield to a 1-year contract, they're probably looking at a quarterback here. We need a quarterback too here in round 2. Or we're really eyeing a quarterback here in round 2. What's it going to take to trade it over New Orleans? That's going to be the hard part, is how do you play this without showing your whole hand?
Yeah. And you know what? The opposite end of that spectrum is true too. Say the Indianapolis Colts end up signing Derek Carr. The Colts hold the number 4 overall draft pick. Now, they have plenty of other needs too. But if I'm the New Orleans Saints, knowing that those other quarterbacks are going to be available, at least one of them at number 4, I'm immediately picking up the phone and saying, Jim Irsay, Indianapolis Colts, what do you want for number 4? So whoever does get Derek Carr, if they are drafting ahead of the New Orleans Saints in the first round, all of a sudden that opens up a potential trade partner for the Saints if they are eyeing one of those other higher rated quarterbacks.
Well, that's true, not just for Derek Carr. I mean, if you go down the list,
yeah.
Okay, Derek Carr, you brought up Jimmy G, any of those, let's just say top 4, top 5 quarterbacks in free agency, and that's including Lamar Jackson. Lamar's not coming to New Orleans. Lamar's not leaving Baltimore. But I have to include him on the list because he's a pending free agent. Out of those top 4 or 5 guys, if the Saints don't end up with any of them, it is likely that wherever those guys land, they are drafting before New Orleans in the first round. So that is an interesting way to look at it too, because like I said, the Saints are drafting 29th. If you're drafting that late, either you've traded your pick or you don't need a quarterback because you were just making a run for a Super Bowl championship. So it's going to be interesting to see what New Orleans does. We'll definitely keep up with any more visits and any more news that breaks with not just Hendon Hooker, but any quarterback the Saints may fall in love with. Remember, wasn't it just a few years ago? Let's say a few years ago. It's been 4 or 5 years ago. The smokescreen of Lamar Jackson to trade up and get Marcus Davenport. I mean, we all thought it was happening. I absolutely believed. You didn't. I absolutely believed that there was enough interest, and when the trade went through, I said, "Oh, here it goes."
No, I didn't. But I'll tell you why. Our mutual friend Mike Detillier helped me out with that one. And this was the first rendition of the Bayou Blitz podcast, which was not video. It was all audio. This was only the second or third show that Kyle Mosley and I ever did on the original Bayou Blitz. And we had the incomparable Mike Detillier, draft guru, on. And the Saints had just made the trade to move up to 18. The rumors were in the air. And you're right. Everybody thought quarterback. And I remember asking Mike the question. I thought it might be a defensive player. And he said, I specifically was eyeing up linebacker, actually. I forget who off the top of my head. And Mike said, no. He goes, Lamar is a possibility. But I'll tell you, next to having a quarterback, the next most valued commodity in the NFL today is the guy that can put the quarterback on the ground. So he cautioned us. And I think the Bayou Blitz was on Wednesday then too. So we were two days away from the draft. He said at the time, he goes, you watch that the Saints make this move. It'll be for a pass rusher. And sure enough, as everybody knows, it ended up being Marcus Davenport.
John Butler, the classic nickname for Davenport, 2 firsts. Yeah, and that's we haven't even talked about the defensive side of the football and guys that are going to be free agents. We're going to be doing that next week. Davenport is going to be a guy to the Saints bring back, to the Saints not bring back, especially with the lack of development from Peyton Turner. There's going to be a lot of questions all over the place. But let's be honest, without a lot of production from Davenport, they were pretty good last year. Without any production for the most part, outside of a blocked field goal in week 1 from Peyton Turner, not a whole lot of production. The Saints seem to be fine, so they'll have some questions to answer as well. Well, folks, that's going to be all the time we have for the Bayou Blitz on this Wednesday evening. Bob, real quick, as we continue to roll in the off season, we get closer to the draft, one of your favorite times of the year, one of my favorite times of the year. Where can people make sure to check out your lovely analysis of all these prospects that are going to be coming out?
Hey, Brendan, I don't know about lovely. This is the time of year where I get called all kinds of names. The friendliest among them being idiot. For my free agency or draft projections. But be that as it may, if you wish to read my works, and I hope you do, because that's how I put food on the table. You can follow me at Bob Rose over on Facebook. I'm at Bobby R 2613 on Twitter, and I do publish my works through the Saints News Network at Saints News over on Twitter. Right now, we're not quite into free agency predictions yet or draft analysis, but that's right around the corner. Stay tuned tomorrow. I've started my year in review segments for individual Saints players. So hopefully you can give me a little bit of insight on that, and make sure you follow our other great writers. Our editor, Kyle Mosley, and our senior writer, John Hendricks. They're going to be chipping in. All three of us are working on this stuff together. Folks, also, I want to thank you again. I know I do so every week, but I don't care. I'm going to do it every week until the end of time. You folks that have made the Bayou Blitz what it is so far, we both thank you and want to express nothing but love for you. You're making this show more and more powerful, and I hope that you continue to do so. Make sure you direct people to our Bayou Blitz Facebook page. Make sure you direct people to our Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod. Keep this thing growing. Brendan and I aren't going anywhere. We are going to have lots and lots of guests lined up for you this summer. Entertaining, informative, all of the above. To join us in, we're going to have more giveaways like Brendan did a couple of weeks ago. I guess it'd be my turn for the next giveaway, huh? Won't be till tax refund time. Hint. But yeah, seriously, for you folks that have made this what it is so far, and I know I speak for Brendan too, you've made it a blast for us, but you also made your show. You've made this your show like we asked you to do from the start. So continue doing so. You're doing such a fantastic job.
Oh, absolutely. It's one thing I look forward to every week. It's nice to see familiar faces, not just seeing Bob, but seeing you guys in the chat every week. You guys keep it fun. You keep it entertaining. That's why I love doing a live show too. If Bob and I just sat here and pre-recorded it and threw it out on, Apple, Spotify, whatever, it wouldn't be as fun because I get to interact with you guys. That's half the fun. You guys are wonderful. For myself, you can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan. Make sure to follow all of my colleagues over at the Saints News Network. They're doing wonderful work. And, I think it's fair now to promote some of my other work. As you guys know, leaving Saints News to go all in on my production company, released the first podcast under the production company. It's called Thoughts of Bruin. It's a podcast that I'm hosting with a guy that I worked with ESPN-wise in the Big South. We went on to both work on a film, The Dancing Bulldogs, and he is the youngest member of the Southeastern Film Critics Association, Thomas Manning. We wanted to take both of our backgrounds in storytelling, him with movies and me in sports, because every broadcaster telling a story. At least that's what my professors and people I worked for told me. I don't know if I listened to them sometimes, but nonetheless, we wanted to take that and combine it and go, how do we tell stories for people who aren't behind a microphone all the time? right? We're always interviewing celebrities and athletes and A-list people. But what about Jimmy, Mr. Jimmy who lives down the street that is your local produce farmer? What about the guy we interviewed this week? He's the director of broadcasting at Indiana State University. He's the guy that actually puts on the show and puts people in the spotlight. What's his story? How did he get his start? What's important in his life? So we have started that podcast again. It's the Thoughts of Bruin podcast on Bottom of the Mug production. So if you guys would check that out, I'd really appreciate it. We'll grab some of our guests from there, bring them on over here as well, kind of do some cross promotion because that's what we're all about here.
I just don't want to see you start to put together a Bayou Blitz 30 for 30 or whatever your rendition is going to be, because that means some bad things must have happened to us.
Oh man, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. No, we haven't quite hit the next film project, but I certainly hope it's not a Netflix special on Bob Rose. I don't know if I can handle that. The world couldn't handle that. Don't do it. You're not signing off on that one, huh?
I am not. Presidential elections coming up. I believe that the President Jim Everett and Vice President Bob Rose. I'm going to believe we have a shot this time. Until otherwise stated. So yeah, we got to keep that Bob Rose 30 for 30 out of the public headline at least till after that.
Okay, all right. We'll do a rough cut. We'll send it for approval. We'll have it released in 2035.
Fair.
All right, there we go.
I'll be too old to care by then.
Shoot, you might be delusional in 2 or 3 years. Let's be honest.
This is true.
That is true. Guys, we appreciate you hanging out with us so much. You can follow Bob and I. We already threw it up there, but you guys should know by now, you regulars. If not, just go follow all of Bob's work with the Saints News Network. Until next Wednesday, you guys find your peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll be back talking about the defensive side of the ball in the most important Saints offseason ever next week on the Bayou Blitz. We'll see you then.